Good afternoon, Professor Nellis. Great to see you after 8 years, I believe.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, it's good to see you as well, Aman. I'm so pleased you invited me to do this interview. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Pleasure is all mine, sir, for finding some precious time for us for this episode of Vaartaalaap. And for my viewers, Professor Nellis is a professor of global economy at Cranfield School of Business, and he has been there for 36 years now.
Correct.
That's a very long time, sir. How
I'm still enjoying it.
And you were my professor at the GISMA Business School during the macroeconomics class, and I remember that very fondly. It was my first macroeconomics class, and whatever I could learn and pick up was from you, sir.
Thank you.
So, sir, we are living in COVID times, and in UK, I believe the Prime Minister has also now gone into ICU. What do you feel is the impact on economy globally going to be? Are we going to see recession, especially in the developed world? India and China might be exceptions, as a lot of people are saying.
Well, normally I'm an optimistic economist, but I have to admit that I am now becoming a pessimist, and that is worrying me. I think we are living in the most difficult economic times in my lifetime, and possibly the most difficult times since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Remember, normally I'm an optimist, so I really don't want to say these words, but I feel we've got to be realistic. There is no doubt in my mind that the world is moving into a recession this year. Some people are even speculating it could be another Great Depression. I'm not that pessimistic because governments are across the world doing everything possible to stimulate their economies. And as you know, central banks have also responded with significant reductions in interest rates, including in India as well, and right across the globe. And we have never seen so much liquidity being pumped into the world's economy as we've seen in the last few weeks. So I think we're heading into a recession. Of that, I'm sure. However, and you hinted at this, my greatest concern is actually for the developing economies of the world, the ones that have the least resources available to tackle this problem, this pandemic, as well as economic crisis. So I really am concerned for many, many countries who are in a much weaker position than we are in the so-called West and the so-called developed economies. And my heart goes out to them. I hope everybody survives and comes out of this secure, but I think there will be a lot of countries that will struggle.
So I'll come to the interest rate, you touched upon it, but UK is also undergoing Brexit. What happens to something like that? I mean, the impact would have been, it's a double bevemy for UK as I can understand now.
You know, of course, I've thought about this myself in the last few weeks. And what is, well, interesting, maybe the wrong word, but there is no talk about Brexit at this point in time in the UK. It's as if it didn't happen or it won't happen. And there is a problem, therefore, because, as you know, we are due to finally leave the European Union on December 31st, with or without a deal, according to the Prime Minister. And he has said, if there is no deal by December 31st, then we will leave without a deal. Well, personally, I think that's a mistake. I think we have to have a deal. And therefore, given that Brexit seems to have been pushed to the side at the moment, or at least postponed, I would hope that common sense will prevail. I hope they decide to extend the transition period and ask for an extension. I'm quite sure the Eurozone or the EU countries would agree to this if we asked for it. So I really am hoping that stubbornness will not get in the way of common sense. I personally think Brexit is a mistake. And I think this latest pandemic emphasizes the point that I want to make. I think given the circumstances around the world today, the global trade tensions, the economic problems, the growing income inequalities, never before have I believed in so much need for unity and cooperation. And I really, therefore, would rather the UK stayed in the EU, even though it's an imperfect club. It is still a club in which members can help each other, and therefore, the lack of conversation does worry me, because it may mean that we crash out on December 31st without a deal, and that would be, I think, a huge mistake for this economy.
I hope the saner minds can discuss this or at least postpone it, considering the
Correct.
impact of COVID-19.
That's what I'm hoping.
Sure. Coming to the interest rate regime, and you mentioned rightly, India repo rate has been reduced by the central bank. In Western world, the federal bank in US and the European central bank, they have been putting a lot of liquidity. The interest rate regime is close to zero. So, do you think that will increase demand? Will there be no fiscal pressure going forward?
Oh, well, most economies, certainly here in Europe and in the USA, they have not only expanded liquidity and dropped interest rates to record lows, but governments are also stimulating the economies through fiscal policy. So we are at a unique time in history where we're seeing fiscal and monetary policies as expansionary as we've ever seen them in our lifetimes. That's quite something to say. But there's a problem. There is a problem. There is a saying in macroeconomics that when interest rates fall so low, we may end up pushing on a string. And what that means is they are ineffective in stimulating the economy. So the interest rates here in the UK are now 0.25%. They could go down to zero, but I think it's irrelevant. They will not do any more to the economy. The quantitative easing has been restarted again. There's lots of money available for banks to lend. The question is, will they lend, and can they take the risk in expanding their lending? So monetary policy is firing both cylinders, liquidity and interest rates. And at the same time, we have governments who are now increasing their government borrowings dramatically. And now, of course, we're all Keynesians. Keynes coined the phrase, spend your way out of recession. But I want to say one more thing about this expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. Remember, for 30 years, in fact, slightly more than 30 years, Japan has been doing the same thing in terms of monetary policy. And for 30 years, they have struggled most of the time to stimulate their economy significantly. But it's they're still a rich country, so they're still fine. But we could end up with a situation of low interest rates for many more years to come, which means that monetary policy will be ineffective in stimulating the economy. And this is not a good situation to be in, by the way.
I mean, especially in India, there has been a lot of noise that we are not growing at 7%, 8%. We have come down to close to 5%. And there was already a lot of pressure on the government. RBI has helped in the low interest rate regime, but private investments have not picked up over last couple of years. Their balance sheets have not been doing pretty well. What do you suggest for RBI governor, or even in terms of fiscal policy, what the government should be doing apart from spending?
Well, I'm an external, so for me to give advice to the Indian government, I think is a little bit difficult. And I certainly would not suggest that I or anybody else outside of India knows better than the Indian government. So let me make that point very clear. I respect them for what they've done. And you say India is only growing at 5%. Many countries in the world will be celebrating growth of 5%.
Exactly.
So let's keep this in context. If we talk about China and compare that with India, remember the Chinese government for the last couple of years has intentionally been slowing down their economy because they don't want it to overheat. They don't want it to grow too fast. So in some ways, I'm actually more content to see India growing a little bit more slowly, provided this growth rate is sustainable. That's the key factor. It's high growth of 7, 8, 9% may not be sustainable. So I hope 5% is more sustainable, and only time will tell. But my advice to the Indian government, as I say, it's not for me to give advice to the Indian government, but I'm happy to give my opinion on what they should do. And in my opinion, it's not only a matter of maintaining short-term economic activity. In other words, low interest rates, more government borrowing, more government spending. That's fine. What I would love to see, what I want to see, is the Indian government thinking much more about the longer-term sustainable growth of the Indian economy. Economists have a cliche which we use to explain this. Investment is the engine of growth. So the Indian government, despite this crisis right now, I hope they will continue to invest in the infrastructure, in the roads, in the housing, in the factories, and in the skills development of your people. To me, that's the number one priority, not for the short term, but for the longer term. And I say exactly the same thing in the UK, because for many years, we have not invested enough in our human capital and physical capital. Well, I hope India will learn from our mistakes, of course.
Yes, I mean, the capacity building is on the pipeline. I've seen a lot of investment happening on that side. So there is no dearth of it. The only thing is, what you hear as a noise from a lot of economists is that to bring out more people out of poverty, we need to grow fast. And that's an argument that has been made. So that's why if you fall down below a curve of 6.5%, 7% to 5%, there are noises which come up. Sure.
No, I would accept that point, by the way. That's why I was very cautious about giving my opinion, because we in the UK have the luxury of discussing these things at a high level. But when you look at people at the bottom of the pyramid, at the base of the pyramid, they don't have the luxury to discuss these things in this way. So I absolutely do understand what you're saying.
And the other thing is, there is a clamor by 2025. The PM has said he wants India to be a 5 trillion economy. We are currently a 3 trillion economy in purchasing power parity terms, and he wants to grow to 5 trillion by 2025. Do you think something like that is feasible if there is an investment path?
Well, it's possible, but politicians are infamous for setting down marker posts in the ground. It sounds great, and it's not a criticism. I think it's a good tactic to motivate the population to feel confident to achieve such an ambition. But whether it's 2025 or 2027 or 2030, I think is not that critical. Although poor people need to see that growth, as you said. However, whether it's achievable or not in a very short time period. And of course, this pandemic may well make it less achievable. I'm looking much further ahead, and I do believe by perhaps 2050, which is a lifetime away, but I think we will see India in the number 2 position in the world in terms of economic size. Because I think it'll be China, India, and then USA. Of course, being in number 2 position is one thing. But you hinted at it, and I want to come back to this point you raised earlier. What I'm much more interested in, and I'm sure you're much more concerned about, is not the size of the economy, but the distribution of income. It's the income inequalities, which I would much rather focus on. So India is a big economy. It will become an even bigger economy. The challenge is, can you distribute this income generation across your population in a way that pulls people out of poverty? To me, that's the number 1 priority, in my opinion.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. The one thing which I wanted to add was thinking more in terms of per capita income. We think about the size of economy, but we don't discuss about per capita income. So by 2050, India might be the second biggest economy. But what would be the per capita income? That will make a difference.
And it will not be in the top 10 of the world even. I mean, as I say, this is a topic that I frequently talk about in my lectures, and I really am concerned about the widening income gap, not only in India, but across the world. And in Africa, they've got a saying which says, a hungry man is an angry man. And governments, I think, they ignore this at their peril. So I would absolutely implore every government, especially the Indian government, please focus on how you can help those at the bottom of the pyramid, not just those at the top of the pyramid. Ronald Reagan followed a policy which became known as trickle-down economics. If you make the rich richer, it will trickle down to the masses. Well, I don't believe that has been successful. I think the poverty gap has got bigger, not smaller, in the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah. So you hit upon the income disparities. And one thing which has come out of Scandinavia and some other countries as well has been this appeal for universal basic income. How do you see something like that panning out? There have been some discussions here in India as well. What do you think of something like that?
I'm so glad you raised this topic because it's one that I have talked about in my own lectures for the last few years. So I was looking at this quite early on. And, until a few weeks ago, I thought this was an interesting academic topic. But it is quite surprising how quickly this topic has now become a major talking point. For example, here in the UK, we have the government has implemented the job retention scheme. The job retention scheme will allow people to be given leave of absence from their jobs, but will then receive a minimum income, which by your standards will be very high, but it's averaged by our standards of up to £2,500 per month for 3 months.
Okay.
In a sense, that is a form of universal basic income. And nobody has objected to this, by the way. So suddenly everybody is becoming a supporter of a universal basic income. But of course, this is only a short-term measure. I tend to look at this much longer term. And let me give you a scenario, hypothetical scenario perhaps, but I want you to use some imagination. Imagine we can move the clock forward 50 years, let's say. And imagine we live in a world where 80% of the income of a country is generated by robots. Let's think of robotics taking over. And it sounds fantastic. Imagine the robots doing most of the work. Autonomous vehicles, autonomous factories, autonomous hotels, autonomous restaurants, autonomous taxis, and so on. Imagine, and even I could be a robot giving this presentation. My problem then will be this. Who owns the robots? And therefore, who is generating the income? And how is that income going to be distributed to the people? That's the big, that question really is the reason for the discussion about a universal basic income. We've got to start to talk today about this, and people need to adjust to a future that may not be that far away in terms of, remember, the distribution of income. And by that, I'm really referring to the proportion of income going to the, let's call them the capitalists, and I mean that in a very polite way, and the proportion going to the workers. I'm almost sounding like a Marxist, but I mean this in a very practical way. How do you distribute the income from those who generate it to those who need it? Yeah. And to me, this is a universal basic income topic right at the heart of the subject. So I think it's good we're talking about it. Yeah. The current crisis is reflecting some of these points, but I think we need to come back to this and look at this on a longer term basis. And society, I think, may have to adjust to this across the world in time to come.
So coming to one last question and hitting the full circle, we live in the era of stimuluses, and we hope every government will be doing what it can globally. So where do you think, how can the consumption rise in such an environment wherein there is a lot of negativity, where the animal spirits might be down, considering COVID and whatever is happening? How should the government be lifting consumption apart from its investments that it is doing? How to bring in household savings into the pictures, or bringing that money into financial markets to increase that level of consumption and activity?
But you've made the right, you've spoken the right concept, animal spirits. Yeah. A concept created by John Maynard Keynes. Yeah. Animal spirits surely could never be lower than they are today. And therefore, the question you're raising is, how can the government somehow get people to use their savings for consumption purposes to maintain demand in the economy? Yeah. Do you know, I think the experience of Japan over the last 30 years has shown us that this is not easy and may not even be possible. In a number of countries, they even got negative interest rates. You pay a fee for having a bank account with zero interest, and still people will save money. And if they don't save it in the bank, they will put it under the bed. Although in India, they'll put it to gold, of course.
Yeah.
And so I believe this is a problem. And I do not believe there's an easy solution. What Japan did, and America is doing it as well, they may have to give people free money, literally free money, send you a check into your bank account. But even by doing that, there's no guarantee people will spend that money that they're given for free. Yeah. But this is really a reflection of how low the animal spirits have fallen. But let me be also positive in some ways. You know, this recession we're heading into, I hope, and I say that very carefully, I hope it's going to be short-lived. I fear it could be 2 or 3 or even 4 quarters, which begins to head towards a depression. You know, more than a year, you're starting to worry about this. Yeah. But the positive message is this: when we do see recovery, and there will be recovery, I think we're going to see a very sharp upturn in spending. Because the amount of money is being pumped in, the amount of money that people are saving, the discretionary spending that they have not achieved, car sales and so on. So I have got optimism, but only in the future. And I just think we've got to go through these next 6, 9, 12 months and hope that we come out of it with companies that are not closed forever. That's my biggest concern is that when people lose their jobs and companies close down, will they reopen again? That's a huge concern. Yeah. So government efforts have to focus on that, on those sectors in particular. And before we finish, I just want to say, I hope I have the opportunity to wish everybody in India, health and safety. I hope you and your family and all the families that may be listening really take care of themselves, and please do what you're told to do in these difficult times to maintain your health.
Sure, sir. Your message will surely reach a lot of masses, especially English speakers and readers and listeners. And I wish you health as well to your family and everybody in UK and globally as well. It was pleasure hearing your perspective. My personal animal spirits are very high, and I hope we don't see recession, and hopefully the global economy will be back on track in less than 1 year. Thank you, sir. Thanks for your time today.
My pleasure, and many thanks indeed. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.